came nearer to the trees. Romeo and Arthur watched, very afraid. Then, after a minute, Romeo said, "Arthur, there are not ghosts. That's James." "So it is. And that's Joe. And the other man, it's Dr. Robinson. What are they doing here?" "They are grave robbers, Arthur. They are going to rob a grave. My father told me about it. The doctor wants a body, you see. He cuts it up because he wants to learn about—" "Shh," said Arthur. "They are getting near." The three men stopped at Hoss Williams' grave. Joe and James began to dig. 10 minutes later, the grave was open. "Now, doctor," said James, "you want us to take the body to your house. That's $5 more." "No," said the doctor. "I gave you the money this morning. I'm not giving you any more." "Now, you listen to me, doctor," said Joe. "I want that money. Do you remember a day 5 years ago? I came to your house and asked for something to eat, and you gave me nothing. Nothing. So give me that money." He took the doctor's arm, but suddenly the doctor hit him, and Joe fell to the ground. "Don't hit my friend," cried James. He jumped on the doctor and the two men began to fight. It all happened very quickly, and the two boys watched with open mouths. Joe got up. He had James's knife in his hand now, and he moved behind the doctor. Then the doctor hit James on the head. James fell to the ground, and at the same moment, the knife in Joe's hand went into the doctor's back. The doctor fell to the ground on top of James, and he did not move again. The two boys could watch no more. Very quietly, they moved away from the trees and then ran out of the graveyard and back to the village. Joe stood by William's grave and looked down at the two men. Then he put the knife into James's hand and sat down. 3, 4, 5 minutes went by. Daniel moved a little and opened his eyes. What happened, Joe?" he asked. "This is bad, James," said Joe. "Why did you kill him?" James looked at the doctor's dead body, then at the knife in his hand. "Me? Did I kill him?" His face went white, and the knife fell from his hand. "It's the whiskey, Joe. I never fight with knives usually. Oh, why did I drink all that whiskey tonight? I don't remember anything." "It is okay, James," said Joe. "I'm not going to tell anyone. You get away quickly. Go on. Go now." James got up and ran away. Joe watched him for a minute. Then he carefully put the knife next to the doctor's body. Then he too left the graveyard. The next day, the sheriff's men found the doctor's body in the graveyard and James's knife. That night, James came to the graveyard to get his knife, but the sheriff's men were there, and they took James to London's little jail. And there James sat for 3 weeks and waited for his trial. Arthur and Romeo could not forget that night in the graveyard. They were very unhappy and very afraid. "What are we going to do?" said Arthur. "James didn't kill the doctor. Joe did." "We saw him, I know," Romeo said. "But what can we do? We can't tell anyone. I'm afraid of Joe. He's dangerous, and he's a killer. Do you want a knife in your back?" "Yes, I'm afraid of him, too," Arthur said. He thought for a minute. "I'm sorry for James, But you are right, Romeo. We can't tell anyone about Joe. The summer holidays came and there was no school. Arthur didn't want to think about James and Joe, but it wasn't easy. At night, when he was in bed, he saw Joe's face in the dark and he couldn't sleep. But he couldn't talk to anyone about it. One hot summer's day, he and Joe were down by the river. They sat and watched the boats and fished and talked. "Let's get away from here," said Arthur suddenly. "Let's go and do something exciting somewhere." "Okay," said Joe, "but what? And where?" "I know," Arthur said. "Let's run away. Let's go and live on Jackson's Island. We can sleep out under the trees." Jackson's Island was in the Mississippi. Nobody lived there. "Let's ask Romeo, too," said Arthur. "But don't tell your mother or father or anyone. Go home and get some things to eat and meet me here at midnight." That night, 3 boys in a small boat went down the river to Jackson's Island. They had some bread and some meat, and Romeo had his pipe too. When they got there, they carried everything on to the island and made a fire under a big old tree. Then they cooked some of meat over the fire, and oh, that meat was good! The best dinner in the world. Soon they stopped talking, their eyes closed, and they slept. The next morning Arthur woke up with the sun on his head and a smile on his face. Then Romeo and Joe woke up, and the 3 boys ran down to the river to swim. After that they fished, and soon they had about 6 big fish for their breakfast. They cooked the fish on their fire and ate them all. They were very hungry. "That," said Joe happily, "was a wonderful breakfast." After breakfast, they walked through the island, swam some more, talked, fished, and swam again. They came back to their fire in the afternoon. Suddenly, Arthur looked up and said, "Listen, can you hear boats?" They listened and then ran across the island to look down the river. There were 20 or more boats on the water. Every boat in London was out. "What are they doing?" asked Joe. "They are looking for a dead body, I think," said Romeo. "They did that last summer when Bill fell in the river and drowned." "Who's dead, do you think?" asked Joe. The boys watched the boats. Suddenly Arthur cried, "I know who's dead. It's us. They are looking for us." This was wonderful. Arthur looked at his friends. "We are famous," he said. "Everybody in London is talking about us, and they all feel sorry for us." Night came, and the boys went to sleep, but Arthur did not sleep, and when morning came, he wasn't there. "Romeo, where's Arthur?" cried Joe. "I don't know," Romeo began, "but look, there he is. He is swimming across to the island now. Hey, Arthur!" At breakfast, Arthur told his story. "I went home last night," he said, "and listened at the window. Joe, your mother was there too. She and Aunt Nancy cried and cried. I heard some very interesting things. On Sunday, there's going to be a big funeral at the church for us. And listen, I've got a wonderful idea." Romeo and Joe listened and laughed. And yes, it was a wonderful idea. That night the boys cooked some more fish, and after dinner Romeo got out his pipe and began to smoke. "Can we smoke too?" asked Arthur. "I want to learn." So Romeo made pipes for Arthur and Joe, and the 3 boys sat and smoked. "Hey, I like smoking," said Arthur. "It's easy." "It's nothing," said Joe. I'm going to smoke every day. But after 10 minutes, Arthur and Joe got quieter, and their faces went an interesting color. I'm going for a little walk now, said Arthur. He stood up carefully and walked away into the trees. Me too, said Joe quickly. The two boys came back an hour later, but they didn't smoke their pipes again. On Sunday morning, there were no happy faces in London. Aunt Nancy and Joe's mother and father were in the church, and all the boys' friends.